Hi, my name is Lizzie Goldsmith, and I'm the creator of this dramatic audio adaptation of Addie Zierman's memoir, When We Were on Fire. Episode 3 will be out next week, but in the meantime, I hope you enjoy my conversation about Episode 2 with Addie and Aria Sivick, who voiced Addie. Today we're talking about life imitating art, our deconstruction origin stories, and what else happened in China. And be sure to listen all the way to the end for a sneak peek of Episode 3 after the credits. Enjoy! Hi, I'm Lizzie Goldsmith. I'm here again with Addie Zierman, the author of When We Were on Fire, and Aria Sivick, the voice actor, just kind of who is leading this whole charge on the voice side. So welcome back, you guys.
Hello.
So yeah, episode 2, getting into episode 2. And when I think about episode 2, I think this is the episode that covers so much ground from a time perspective and is always the one I'm worried about losing people of like this shift to this shift. And so just kind of briefly, this episode covers, college to marriage to, teaching English in China, and that being, just a harder, more lonely experience. And then, Addie, you're coming back to the States and looking for community, particularly church community, and, having trouble finding it. And then that becoming sort of, becoming more and more disillusioned just about the whole thing. And so a lot of ground covered in this episode. And for me, when I think of specific parts, I think about, I mentioned the montages being something that stands out to me, like both sonically and just from a storytelling perspective. But I really like the kind of the transition from the bachelorette party into China. And that's probably the most risky choice I made in terms of, am I gonna lose people here with this moment? But it felt like something that makes sense from going, how do you go from this like really joyful experience to this experience that is very, very flat, very gray feeling from the inside. And having, for those who haven't listened to it, just kind of, it's jumping into this like pond and then kind of having this, like, you sound like you're drowned, it's like, and then you kind of come up and you're in China and we've done a time jump. And, it's, life looks a lot different than it did kind of when you're about to get married. So that's one for sure that stands out to me when I think about this episode. Anything that stands out to kind of either of you on kind of remembering or first or recent listens?
Yeah, when you mentioned montage, it got my memory that I really liked what you did with the It As Well, where we're singing that hymn and I'm, kind of interspersing it with those really lonely and isolating interactions in China. My Andrew was an international business major, so ostensibly that's why we went to China, so he could put his language degree into use. So it wasn't a missions thing, but of course there's always that undercurrent. And the group, it was us. And then it ended up being a group, speaking of shiny, happy people, the group that we were with was all from the IBLP, Bill Gothard, that world. So they had a different kind of fundamentalism that was very different than mine. And kind of starting with really starting with that relationship with Chris was the first seeds of like never feeling like I was a good enough Christian no matter what I did. And then I got to Northwestern and that kind of reverberated. Like I had these roommates who like inexplicably just did not like me and did not think I was devout enough. And I met Andrew really early on, and there was like, even though everyone at Christian school is kind of there to get married, there's like some judginess if you like meet your person too soon, so there was a little bit of that, like, so it was just this kind of like slowly realizing that I don't really fit in where I thought I fit in. And I had Kim there and I had Andrew, so it was okay. And I ended up in a creative writing with a creative writing professor who was really instrumental and meaningful. And helpful to me in a lot of ways. So that was okay. But then when I went to China, it was like just another layer. Here's this, super fundamentalist group of young Christians who, have been homeschooled all their life and don't know what to do with me. And that was all that I had. That was the only other Americans there. And so it was like the loneliness was both being part of being in a culture that I couldn't speak the language and didn't understand, but it was also being with Christians who also didn't really get me. And it was both of those pieces. And I think that was part of what made it, such a hard year for me. But I really loved how I feel like it really, the way you did the recording and the way you interspersed that hymn, and it wasn't well with my soul. But I had to say it was, because that's what you did. And yeah.
I mean, I'm really glad you mentioned, like, I included that hymn because it had been mentioned in the book, like so many things that had their roots, the dancing from the first episode, and like there's cool things you can do sonically, but those roots were really there in the original. And was glad, because I was like, as much as I had to like change things, I was like so wanting to keep it as true to it is absolutely possible. I do think this part is one where there's so much more context with China than I was able to put into the book and like into the audio drama in just like a few short minutes. So yeah, it's another one of the, I feel like every episode I'm gonna like plug, like, please read the book. It's an amazing book. I will continue to reread it throughout my life. But if you relate to this, if they relate to this story, I think the book is for you. But yeah, and I mentioned last episode that I had an experience in China as well. I think it was about a year before I read the book, and I was like, oh, China, which is a pivotal experience for me in a very different way. I was on a Youth with a Mission, YWAM missions trip right out of college. And, it was kind of, I wasn't necessarily thinking I want to be a missionary. It was more like I was very depressed in college and I want to, find what I'm supposed to do and, kind of have this purpose and be around people who could come alongside me and all that. And it was a really good experience, but it was also the experience where my kind of deconstruction started. Like, I don't know that a lot of, it's not always hard to like pinpoint that moment, but for me, I'm like, yep, it was lying on that floor of the church in England where I started like having my, that dark night of the soul, so to speak. But, I traveling and being abroad, I feel like can really bring things to the fore that weren't, that you were there, but had been maybe like dormant, or just circumstances come out in a certain way. But I do want to kind of get into more of that, search for community and kind of, that movement from, that obsession, which is kind of going with the titles of the book, to like this disillusionment. But Aria, I want to bring you in. What stands out to you the most from this episode? Did you remember recording it or listening back to it?
Yeah, listening back, there is that really raw feeling of not belonging somewhere where you're supposed to feel like you belong, and that's compounded by a feeling of I'm not good enough. And those things are just naturally related. And I think that was a very tappable source and emotion to pull from, because, I've definitely been there too. I never traveled internationally on a mission trip or anything like that. But I did do several mission trips, as I mentioned in the other episode. I did mission trips out to Tennessee, where we would go and renovate people's houses or their outdoor enclosures or decks. And I also felt cast out and shunned a lot of the time. And a lot of it at that time was because of petty teenager things and, and everyone's trying to find themselves. But that people, especially I found, like women can be very, I would not say we were women at the time, but young girls can be very mean and very toxic to each other in those environments. And they were kind of the roommates, like that roommate situation for me. And so that was definitely a standout moment for me as well. And I think that's overall what I really do resonate and remember. With there's always those other like fun moments like the bachelorettes and then that's so fun. That was great. And that was definitely present in the room too. I remember all of us having such fun recording that. Because you could just genuinely like pull from that too. Like it felt like we were having a moment of bonding as we were portraying a moment of bonding, right? So that's always a blessing when you have that. So
yeah, no, I feel like I really want to get into sort of the community of recording too, because, there was a point where, this was a big cast, but a lot of people had, maybe 1 or 2 days of recording, a couple characters. But, there were several of us who, we kind of had this like standing time of, I know Aria, you and I and Josh, who portrayed Andrew. Every Tuesday, we would be like, all right, here's the scenes for the day, and here's the chips and guac to sustain us as we record. And, and as someone who was like really like so busy, this was like my social time too. And, like that I'm just very nostalgic about that as well. But, it's just kind of like, I mean, the characters of, Alyssa and Kim, and then, the scenes with Josh, those were kind of your main scene partners throughout this experience. And I'm kind of what sticks out to you. You mentioned like kind of you building this community as it was happening, and it kind of being a little bit of like life imitating art. Like, is there anything that stands out to you from these recording sessions as we kind of started building these like relationships within the studio?
Yeah, I mean, as I'm still like working in voiceover, I would never eat chips and guac before a session. But I don't know how we did it. Lizzie. Like those are very good mics. Chips.
We had great mics.
Chips. Or yes, God bless those mics. I could never do that now, but that was just definitely a takeaway, right? And also, I will say, just career-wise, right? That was the first time I got to work with a Neumann U87 for listeners, like that is like the creme de la creme of microphones in our industry. And also, so that was cool. That was very cool. For the first time, it felt like, oh, like this is real. Like this is a real project. And especially after Lizzie got in touch with you, Addie, like just having that feeling of like, oh, this is someone's life and work, that you're adapting and that you get to be a part of. And that just fuels that fire in a very positive way. And also that's where, you learn to respond to direction. Well, I mean, I had that from a live on stage perspective, like from my theater training, but there is something, really special about when you're there, you're being very intimate with the mic, or, Josh was standing right across from me and having in doing it, whether it's making noises, hugging sounds, laughs, kisses. It was so important to learn that stuff in a safe space. And I'm just grateful for that experience, honestly. And Lizzie did a great job of making it. I thought it to be very professional, the setup. Like we joke and we had fun, but it was a great foundation for what it's like to get in a studio. And that is traditionally how audio dramas are recorded, is like theater in a way. Like everyone is in the studio and together. And it's very interesting balancing playing to the mic, but then also you do make that eye contact and you do make those hand motions and those gestures. You live it in your body with what you're doing. So it was just great. And I crave that experience again too. It definitely set that tone for me, for sure.
I'm so glad it was a positive experience for you. I think that's the case for everybody who was involved. I hope so. It was a whirlwind, but a good whirlwind. And we had that, we all had that sense at the time. It was like, we want to, not everybody, read the book. I had read the book. I know, Aria, you read the book. But we were all like really wanting to be, we knew this was a true story and we wanted to click onto that story. And I think having a cast in there like really helped with like, because, not everyone had that background. Like we were saying, like there was occasionally moments where I don't remember the specifics, or I'd be like, oh, what does this phrase mean? And I was like, oh, like maybe I need to unpack that a little bit more. Like, put a little bit more of a definition within the dialogue so that it's, you know, has that accessibility component. But yeah, I keep thinking about, you know, story, you know, like I feel like there's that narrative that non-Christian colleges are hostile to faith and stories of faith. And you know, I mean, I went to a Christian undergrad. This is, you know, Syracuse is a private, you know, it's not a Christian school. But I was so supported by everyone who made this process, you know, like whether or not they had a faith background or not, you know, whether they were atheist or Christian or whatever, like just, I don't know, the number of people who were in the room and just like supporting the project and being a part of the project. I know I just wanted to shout that out because like, yeah. To explore concepts of faith that, you know, in some ways are quite niche, you know, and in some ways are relatable universally, you know, you hope that people will kind of be there and be willing to kind of jump into something different. And so having that come around me was really neat to see.
Yeah, I would like to agree with you. I just found the same experience at my MFA at Hamlin. Like, the line you get fed is, you know, you know, you have to really fight for your faith because everybody's going to try to talk you out of it. And that was not my experience. My experience was push into this, you know, lean into this. You have things to say here, unpack this. I remember asking her, I'm like, I feel like you've told us you have to have some distance between the thing and when you write about the thing. Do I keep writing about this? And she's like, absolutely, you keep writing about this. This is your work. And so I would like to echo that. I think that's another bummer about the evangelical culture is when we make assumptions about the larger culture and that are just not true.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of coming back finally to sort of the events of this episode and they're kind of, you know, your own life experiences that they're the source of. Did you see at the time sort of all this was happening of, you know, China, of like that, you know, this other Christian community that was there that like you just was even more separate from? Were you realizing that you were kind of seeing these cracks in evangelical church culture at the time? Like I mentioned, like when my own deconstruction started happening, you know, you don't always realize it's happening as it's happening. Like, I don't know, kind of seeing it now versus seeing it then, what stands out?
Yeah, I think my deconstruction didn't really start with the theology of anything or any of that. I think it was the lived experience of just feeling like I could never measure up, and this sense of never really belonging. And you know, in my younger years, church was such a place of deep belonging for me, and especially middle school. You know, I was really nerdy, kind of lonely kid at school, and then I came into this junior high youth group and just felt so loved and accepted. And it was like I had this moment of understanding what it was meant to be, what it was supposed to be. And then it was a slow moving away from that and realizing, oh, but that's not how it really is. Like that was a picture of how it could be and should be, but it's not like this. And I just, listening to those scenes of, you know, trying so hard to find a church and to belong in a church, I just feel like church is the loss of my life. To this day, I feel so sad.
Church is very hard to belong to. I still haven't found that. It's hard. I mean, and I've migrated a lot. Like I've been moving around a lot in my life. And every time I think I'm finding it either feels way too culty or, you know, or I'm there for the wrong reasons. Like either whether that be a worship of the worship team or the community feels sugar-coated and to a point where I feel like the black sheep, right? it's hard to find a church where you can be authentic, accepted, especially with with anything from your past. If you don't feel comfortable, being open and vulnerable, it's hard to even establish a bond with anybody without feeling judged. It's an endless search for me, and I've done a lot of like house churches or big massive churches, and then small churches in barns, especially in Florida. And again, like I'm a person that if they have that like very, very, I'm using the word intoxicating because it just feels right, like that worship music, it's so it's emotional candy, and and you feel ingrained. Like I cry a lot when like in those services, like because I do like worship music, or I did, and it does evoke that from you. But it is but then it's hard to, if you don't want to meld and be a pillar of that community right away, you don't want to start volunteering, sometimes like you just want the door to be read, and you just want to go to church and come home and feel that you're closer to God and that you're moving along in your faith journey. Yeah. It's that, I mean, yeah, it's hard. It feels like an impossible task.
Yeah.
Yeah. My church journey has been, and of course we'll be continuing to talk about this as the, episodes go on, because that, the story evolves, and we'll keep telling more of our stories now with it. But yeah, so I live in Colorado now. I moved there sort of a couple years after this China missions experience, and it was kind of right around that I had a lot of these, like right when I came back from China, I was deconstructing, but also leading this youth group, but also hosting on this Christian radio station that was very conservative. And it was a lot of cognitive dissonance, happening all at once, and was very, very aware of like, well, I'm gonna share this like more progressive-y quote and on the radio, because it's really meaningful to me and all this, and so then I moved to Denver, and for the first time I was not working and living and breathing evangelical Christianity constantly. And that was very interesting. And church-wise, I had this like kind of, I call it like liturgical church for like not dummies, for like low church people who didn't have low church. So it was very easy to start it. I really found that meaningful. And I was just kind of been this slow, like I'm getting back into working on this project has made me very like, what is my like relationship with church now? And like, why do these stories continue to pull at me? And I want to keep pulling those threads. I'll keep talking about that. But suffice it to say, church is definitely something where like there'll be some churches, like if I went to them now, I know I would like feel very tense, feel very like, oh, I nope. Nope. And then others that maybe I could relax into a little more, and there'd be less of that pressure to, have to believe X, Y, and Z, or at least pretend to, or something. But church is hard. And I don't know, I feel like I have a friend we've been talking about this. She's the friend I mentioned who read the book and listened to the audio drama because it related to our own experience. She's Christian, and we've been talking about what are you thinking about all this? And I'm like, ask me in November. I want to take some dedicated time once this is all out, and to really think about life, because it's art imitates life, and then life imitates art, and it's real stories. And I don't know, I love this medium because this particular, because I don't know, not to get too much on a tangent, but I love audio dramas because they are so intimate, but there are very few stories like this in this space where it's like a real life story, and it's like, it's not this, like there's a lot of horror and sci-fi and fantasy, and that's great to have those out there, but having these kind of like smaller, quieter stories that, like are about love and faith and loss and, life, just the life we live is so important.
Thanks for listening to this bonus episode with author Addie Zierman, voice actor Aria Sivick, and me, Lizzie Goldsmith. The music you hear in the background was composed by Frank Sheffield. You can find out more about this production and the book it's based on at whenwewereonfirepodcast.com. See you next week.
Here's your latte.
Thank you.
Today, Lindsay Lohan checked herself into a 30-day drug rehab program.
Hi, Mindy.
Hi there. How was your week?
Oh, fine.
21-year-old Lohan, a fixture in LA's late night
Ugh, I wish you would just turn off the news.
Yeah, it's really depressing.
Good morning, ladies.
Hi, Sheila.
Good morning.
I think we're going to be a smaller group today, but maybe that means we can dig a little deeper into the New Testament, see what God has for us there today.
Latte?
I think maybe something a little stronger. Cappuccino?
Okay, thanks, Janet. Who wants to tell us what they wrote for question 4? It says, how would you explain the meaning and results of receiving Jesus?
It means your sins are forgiven and you're not separated from God. Jesus has made his home in your heart and you don't ever have to be lonely anymore.
I don't know. The part about Jesus and not being lonely, just... Are we sure that's true? Because it doesn't always feel true.
Well, we can't really go by feelings, but that's interesting, Addie. Thanks. Okay, let's move on to question 5. For this one, we'll be looking at verse 17.